This is a chatty group today. Chatty. I want to give you a little bit of heads up about where we're going to be going over the next several weeks. We just finished the Prodigal God series, and we got a lot of feedback even before that about a couple of topics that folks said that they would like for us to kind of visit. And one of them was work, and trying to get our hands around how we were created, what role work is supposed to play in our lives. And so we've come up, we're going to spend 3 weeks on a series called Rhythm, where we're going to talk about work, rest, and play. And the truth is that you don't want to just talk about work, but you got to get work down in order to get rest right. If you don't get work right, then you end up really resting at your work and working at your play, and all of the things just don't really work out. So we'll talk about work today and then rest, and they kind of really go together. There's going to be a lot of things I would like to say today about work if it just had one shot at it in terms of balances and kind of boundaries for those kinds of things, but we'll cover those next week. But there's work, then rest, then play. And then there's been a lot of interest in temptation, how to face temptation, some of the strategy behind the enemy in terms of tripping up God's people. So we're going to spend 3 weeks after that in Luke chapter 4 in the temptation of Christ. And so I'm real excited about both those series, and those will take us up to Palm Sunday. And then we're going to jump in and do a new series there. So I come to you kind of as an expert on jobs I don't like. Okay, I've shared this before, but I've actually had, by the time I was 30 years old, I had 23 different jobs. I mean, jobs that I was actually under contract for. And I had some really crazy, really terrible jobs. I had a short stint pumping gas, which happened to be the summer of '73. Those of you who are older, you remember that. My life was threatened several times. Back then, we didn't know how to ration gas in Texas. You guys had a wonderful idea. Go odd even. Texas, we never thought of that. That was just way too. We just decided, let everybody line up and then let the gas attendant working for minimum wage go back 10 cars and put a sign between 10 and 11, car 10 and car 11. Everybody from this far back doesn't get gas. Oh, I'm telling you, it was a great job. My very first painting job, I painted for quite a bit of time, but my very first painting job, after one day on the job, the husband, the father of this home I was painting, came home, and he stopped in his driveway, walked over to me and said, "What can I pay you to stop now?" Really, that is the honest truth. And he paid me, I think it was $100. Just please, no, put the paintbrush down, back away from the house. It was quite unique. If you ever want to hear the rest of that story, that was pretty funny. But I've had a lot of jobs where I didn't fit and didn't really excel. But through the process, God used several different things to kind of move me towards things. In fact, I never intended to be a pastor. And at age 30, made a huge career change. I'm getting out of public education and moving into working for a church, and something I never expected to do. So I've kind of run through the gamut. Although I have a job I like now, I've got a lot of experience in jobs that I don't like. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about work and help you develop a theology of work. Now, some of the specifics you're going to have to draw applications from. The handout that we've got for you, I think a lot of the real benefit of the handout is the stuff that's on the inside for your groups, that you'll work through some of these passages together as a group and discuss some of the things that are going on at work and struggles and temptations and different changes that have to be made. But today I'd like to just kind of spend some time talking to us about work, getting our hands around what the Bible says about it. And I believe it's going to actually be something kind of radical for some of you. And I want to kind of jump in there with that. When white folks finally showed up on the continent of Africa, the Swahili, when they watched them, they named them Mzungu. Now, you would think Mzungu means white dude, or pale guy, or one who gets sunburned easy. Mzungu means one who spins around. And as they watched the activity of those first white folks on the continent of Africa, I think they described a lot of the Silicon Valley kind of habit. We work in a place, in 1990, the average work week in the United States was 40.9 hours, almost 41 hours. 10 years later, it was 49.6. And now, 12 years later after that, or 11 years later after that, it's got to be well over 50, and especially in this valley. So I want to jump in. I want to pray for our time, and I want to do it in a different way. I did it last night in the second service last night. I just kind of got out of the water and had this epiphany. Or I had a bad burrito. I don't know what it was, but I'd like some folks to come up and share the prayer time with me that could pray in a language other than English. I'll pray in English, but I'd like someone else to pray. So is there anyone here who's comfortable in praying in another language other than English? Do we have anybody that'd be willing to do that? Okay, come on up. It doesn't even matter what language. Anybody else? Last night we had Farsi, Turkish, and German. How weird is that? Okay, anybody else? What language are y'all going to pray in? Assyrian and?
Spanish for children. Elementary Spanish.
Spanish for children. Okay, well that's better than the Spanish I know. The Spanish I know is Spanish for cussing, so.
Spanish, South America, and very fast.
Spanish for adults. Okay, good. All right, we're all going to pray at the same time. You guys just hold the mic in the center there, and the amazing thing about God is not only will he hear the prayers that are out loud, he'll even hear your own prayers. So let's pray together and commit this time to Christ. Let's go. Father, thank you for our time together. I ask that you would guide it, you would bless it, you would energize it with your Holy Spirit so that in this really difficult area, we would gain an understanding of how you want us to view work. We ask that Christ would be lifted up in our time, that your word would be honored, and that you would be pleased. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thank y'all. Very good. I think sometimes it's good just to think about who we are a little different than, there's something going on in here other than just English, and the community that we are is very diverse, and it's just, thank you guys for doing that. Spanish for kids. That's hilarious. In the room, we have a lot of folks that are either what I would call John Henrys or Tom Sawyers. Your view towards work is really one or the other, and sometimes a little bit in between. You know who the great story of John Henry, the short story that John Henry was, is this man who could work so hard and so long and so fast, and they put him up against a steam engine, and then what happened? John died. Those of you who don't remember the 5th grade short stories that you read or whatever it was that we had, that John Henry ends up dying. He beats the steam engine, but he ends up dying. And there are some of you that you're on a pace, quite honestly, the expectations, and I know, you're going to say, oh, Steve, you just don't know about my work. Well, okay, I don't. But you're on a pace of 60, 70, even 80-hour work weeks that is not going to be sustainable long term. And then there are some of you are more like Tom Sawyer. You know Tom Sawyer. He was given a great task by his parents to paint the fence, and he finagled and kind of cajoled and worked his friendships in such a way that he ended up getting his friends to do it, and he ended up sitting there drinking iced tea while they do that. And some of you are that kind of a person. Your view towards work is the more I can get out of it, the better. And it's something that's kind of evil to be avoided. I want to tell you that both of those kind of opportunities are really a little bit skewed. And the fact is that as we go towards work, we kind of go into this mentality of it seems to be something to avoid it. It's almost a necessary evil. What I want to tell you is that, in fact, work is, and this is a biblical term, work is pre-fall. If you go to Genesis 1 and 2, work is the activity of God. And it is also the activity of Adam and Eve before sin comes into the world. Work is something that we were actually created and designed for. It is good by nature. Now, the curse in Genesis 3 made work toil, made work hard, made it where it was always kind of a struggle. But in its nature, actually, work is positive. Now, why then is it so weird and hard? Well, let me kind of give you an illustration that kind of lets you see why it's so difficult. If I were to draw a parallelogram on the board, and inside of that parallelogram, there's you, and you is the green. And that's you, all the wonderful things about you, the amazing things and interests that you have, the talents and the gifts that go along. The red is your job. Now, the great part is all of this stuff in the middle, this is all great. That's where you and the job fit. And the better the fit, the taller the parallelogram. Does that make sense? It becomes more of a square. There's less overlap. And then the worse the fit, the more short and long the parallelogram becomes. In fact, some of you are in situations that kind of look really like this, so that the overlap is very small. Wow, that's weird looking. Anyway, you get what I'm talking about. Now, I don't know anybody who has a job that's a square. Now, you may say, oh, I'm perfectly fit for my job. Everything about it I love, and everything they want from me I can do, and all of those kinds of things. And then I would love for you to come up after the service and introduce yourself so that next hour I can say, I only know one person who has a square. Because I just don't know anybody who's perfectly aligned, where everything that is asked of them is everything they're interested in doing and loves doing and is actually good at. Now, this part over here, where the job asks of you things that you can't do or you don't do well, this is actually a very important part of your life. If I am the God of heaven, committed to developing you into the person, the man or woman I intend for you to be, you think that I'm only going to do that at church for 75 minutes? I'm going to take advantage of all of that time. And so all of these things in here that are hard, this is hard, I'm going to use this to develop skill in you and character. These are very important areas. Now, I know you don't like them. I know that they're difficult. I know that they don't go as well sometimes as you'd like, but they're very important areas in your life, because in the plan and the masterpiece that God is involved, and remember, he's committed to you from day one when you come to him. He says that I will complete the work in you from the time you come to him until he comes back or you go home to be with him. And actually, your job and some of the hard parts about your job are there on purpose. Watch this. Some of you, you know that job, that boss you have that you talk about all the time, about what a jerk he is and what a loser, and you could do his job so much better and blah, 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 blah. You may not ever say that out loud, but you think it, 15 hours a day. You might have that boss just for you. God, as the master teacher, might know just the jerk you need, so that he can develop out of you the jerk in you. You get it? By the way, just for free, this has nothing to do with the topic, but some of you have the spouse that you have just on purpose too. Now, this area over here, this area that's green, this is the stuff that you love and you're interested in, and you would do if they would let you do it for free. You would do it no matter what. You love this, but the job won't let you do it. For example, Friday, I played golf with Tom Randall. It was a great treat, and my oldest son. And the guy that we picked up as a fourth would love to play on the senior tour. I mean, he just would love, it would be the dream of his life. But I watched him swing. He ain't playing on the senior tour. And if he ever does play professionally, he's going to be hungry. He just doesn't have the kind of swing he's not going to get paid for. And there are some things in your life that you love, but it's just not, and you might be really great at it, but it's just not a part of the job. So you know what these things are? They're hobbies. Unfortunately, a lot of times they just become hobbies. By the way, just a little parenting tip. If you want to help your child develop skill, you put him in areas that he's not very strong at. And if you want to develop his self-confidence, put him in areas where he really excels. But you've got to live in this square and try to figure out what it looks like. So here, the first thing, a couple of overarching principles is, first, work is pre-fall. It is good at its nature. I know it's hard now, but you think it's an evil to be avoided. It's definitely something that God didn't intend for us. I talk to people and they think God's intention for us on earth is kind of just sitting on the couch, eating bonbons, watching soap operas, I guess. I don't know. But the truth is that I believe before the fall in Genesis 1 and 2, work was being done. And after the resurrection of Christ and his second coming, I believe there's going to be work. And we're all going to get to be squares, perfectly matched with the interests and gifts that we have. A second thing I want you to kind of embrace in terms of what it looks like to develop a theology is that all honest work is sacred and has dignity. There is an unbiblical way of thinking that says there's work that is for good, and then there is work just to be endured. That somehow there's a great chasm between what I do, being paid to be good, and what you do, which is being good for nothing. That there's this false division between clergy and laity. And I know where it came from. You can trace it back in history in terms of what's going on. But I know where it didn't come from. It didn't come from here. It is not biblical. Some of you folks email me or call me and ask me to pray for you like I've got a bat phone to God. You think because I stand here and you sit there that I have a special privilege. And the wonderful truth of the cross of Jesus Christ is what he has accomplished is he leveled the ground at the foot of the cross. And that every vocation that's honest has dignity and is sacred to him. He is just as pleased or just as non-pleased, displeased, thank you. I speak for a living. I'm good at this. Unpleased, non-pleased, click, 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 nothing. He's just as pleased or just as displeased by the attitude that you bring to work and the motivation behind it, not the vocation of what it is. And if you take a look at the jobs that are listed in the scriptures, it is obvious that both manual and mental labor are wonderful tools in his hands to accomplish his purposes. There is no division. There is no division in life. See, we live this life like this. I'm sorry, I went back to the whiteboard. Really wasn't planning to. And this is the secular. And this is the sacred. And there are things in our life that we would only do when we're in our faith mode. Like, I know this. There are words, guys, and gals, actually. There are words that you use all the time during the week that you just don't use when you talk to me. Admit it. It's true. Gals, there are some clothes you own you might not wear to church. What is that? Well, it might be wise. I don't know what you got. But it's a division in our thinking that there's a way I live over here when I'm in the world or in the normal life, and then there's a way I live over here that's when I'm in my faith mode. And the truth is that this division is also unbiblical, and it carries over into our work. And just a challenge for you here, if this is true, and you can kind of lay this out with some more time later on, we're not going to stay here, but this part right here that overlaps, that's actually the integrity that you have in your life. When the secular and the sacred overlap, and the intention is that they would overlap completely. That who you are here on Sunday morning is exactly who you are on Monday morning at the cooler, water cooler, or at the business meeting on Wednesday night. Same person. All right, now, given those things, that work is good and that all work is sacred, all honest work. Now I have to keep saying that because there are some of you out there that'll say, great, dealing drugs is, I knew God was for it. I actually had somebody in Santa Cruz one time tell me that Jesus did drugs and that's why he sold them now, that the frankincense and myrrh were actually cocaine and something else. And anyway, I'm sorry, that's a tangent that I went off on. I shouldn't have gone there. So every honest profession is sacred and has dignity to it. Now, in the midst of that, then, there are 3 questions that I think you have to ask to be able to develop this biblical theology of work. Who do I work for? How am I supposed to work, and why? Turn to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5, and we'll see the answer of all 3 of those questions. Who do I work for? How am I supposed to work, and why? Verse 5, Ephesians 6. It's in your handout, printed out. I'm in the New Living Translation this morning. Slaves, obey your earthly masters. Now, you have to understand that in the first century church, when you talk to most of the churches of those times, over half of the population in those churches were slaves. That was the reality of the Roman culture in this time. And so he wouldn't start this paragraph this way in the 21st century. But in this century, he would have, and it gives this great application. I think it's safe for us to be able to say, this is applications for us for work. Obey your earthly masters with deep respect and fear. And that word for fear is the same word that there's used for fear of God. It's an awe, it's a respect. Serve them sincerely, and sincerely is without hidden agendas, with integrity, as you would serve Christ. Paul is making this amazing statement to these first century believers in Ephesus that I know you've got masters that are over you, that have taken away your rights, that don't honor you the way that they should, but you should serve them in such a way with no strings attached, with the kind of respect that you would give if they were Christ himself. Now, when you think about it that way, that puts the jerk of a boss you've got in a different light. I know some of you want to say, oh, Steve, but you just don't understand. You're up there. This kind of a naive pastor, bald dude. You kind of get it, all this. And you got great bosses and all this kind of thing. You just don't get what it's like. You're right. I admit that. But whatever's going on, I think you're probably still getting paid. Oh, and by the way, gals that are housewives or even Mr. Moms in the room, this has to be the profession that you have that makes the house work, whether you get paid for it or not. No one's taken away your rights, divided up your family, made you live places you don't want to live. You don't have a boss as bad as a slave master. And in that context, he says, work in such a way as if you work for Christ himself. Now, how would you change tomorrow morning if you said, when I punch the clock, I'm punching in for Christ? Rather than the evil to be avoided, rather than the place that you just do whatever the minimum that you have to get done or whatever's asked of you and then kind of get out of there, how would your attitude change? And what should your attitude be like? What should you look like? Well, watch, it goes on to tell us. Verse 6, try to please them all the time, not just when they are watching you. Wow. That takes integrity to a new level. to say, I'm going to work as if I'm working for Christ, even if nobody checked up on me. Even if there's not video cameras in the room, even if there's not a clock or a computer, some system that tells how long I'm there. I'm going to do it even when they're not watching. As slaves of Christ, do the will of God with all your heart. Work with enthusiasm, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Paul goes ahead and just restates the first who you work for by saying, as if you were working for the Lord. And the how is to work with enthusiasm, to even bring it to the small things, the little things that you do that says, I will bring this energy to what I am asked to do. Enthusiasm is this really cool word. If you study kind of how it got together, it's a combination of words in theos, which is in God. You're supposed to work in such a way that God is in you. And you take care of the little things, faithful in those kinds of things, so that Christ is honored as if he was your boss. Now, little stuff really does matter at the workplace. I said last week in one of the Q&A times, I don't know if it was this hour or not, but I said in the last week, if you steal a pen from work, you're a thief. That's what the scriptures teach us. Now, by the way, that's not anything about our Westgate pens. We want you to take those and leave them all over the city. We want you to do that. That's not about this. What it is about is the very little things that we think don't matter. Hudson Taylor said this, a little thing is a little thing, but faithfulness in a little thing is a big thing. Mother Teresa says this, I don't do big things. I do small things with a big love. Norman Vincent Peale said, enthusiasm makes ordinary people extraordinary. Now, what I hope you're doing is fighting the urge to dismiss me as if this doesn't apply to your workplace, and instead asking yourself, what would change in how I approach work if I invited God to be part of that process with me? That if I actually agreed that some of the things that are going on there that I absolutely hate have good intentions behind them. That a good God who can control all things is actually working those things to develop you. Then passages like James 1, Romans 5, and others that talk about rejoicing when you encounter various trials. You could also put in there rejoicing when you encounter jerk bosses. Because you know that all of those things can be used to develop you. Now, why work this way? Why do that? I mean, this is hard. I mean, for some of you, I'm meddling in areas you don't think I'm supposed to go. You believe that secular and sacred division, and I'm supposed to talk to faith issues and not supposed to talk to work issues, and so I'm messing with you. Why? Well, the reason comes in the passage for us. Remember that the Lord will reward each one of us for the good we do, whether we are slaves or free. In the context of talking about work, in this letter to Ephesus, Paul says, remember, the Lord will reward you according to what you do. Now, rewards are a very confusing topic for some folks. We confuse rewards with salvation. Salvation is free. It is given with grace, and we can never earn it. But rewards are earned. Salvation is now. Grace is rewards are later. This whole idea of there is a time, and 1 Corinthians 3 clearly teaches us that there is a time when what we do now will be judged. Now, your salvation's not in danger. Salvation is secure in Christ. But there's the reality of the 1 Corinthians 3 passage says, some of us are going to get in heaven, but we're going to smell like smoke. Now, that's better than the alternative, but it's not as good as it could have been. We were less than faithful with the task we were given now. And part of the greatest task that you're given is to be faithful at work, to bring that to bear. I skipped one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to go back up to the Dorothy Sayers quote at the first. She said this: "In nothing has the church so lost her hold on reality as in her failure to understand and respect the secular vocation. She has allowed work and religion to become separate departments and is astonished to find that as a result, the secular work of the world is turned into purely selfish and destructive ends, and that the greater part of the world's intelligent workers have become irreligious or at least uninterested in religion. But is it astonishing? How can anyone remain interested in a religion which seems to have no concern with 9/10 of their life? The church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him not to get drunk or disorderly in his leisure hours and to come to church on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is this: that the very first demand of his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. That the first aspect of what it means to be a Christ follower is to die to yourself and to invite Christ into every area of your life. And one of the largest areas of your life is where you spend in your vocation and what you do there. And Christ's challenge is for us to change how we view work and to recognize it as a gift. And then to have an understanding that says, okay, I work for Christ. This matters to him. If you can get enthusiastic when you see that it matters to him. And it will matter for eternity. You're selling your little widgets on Tuesday morning matters for eternity. Because everything is sacred, men and women. Everything. Now, how do you get this started? How do we find our rhythm? How do we stop spinning around like Mzungu and get some understanding of how do we kind of do this? Well, the first part I just kind of mentioned is, and it's on the back of your handout to kind of follow along. It's first is we seek God's direction. We surrender. Some of what has to happen in this room is a surrendering of your vocation to Christ. If you have had that as a separate thing, and today you need to begin to just surrender that to him. I'm not talking about everybody going out and having a huge job change. And some of you in your search for a vocation. I know that there are some in the room that are unemployed at this time. In your search for vocation. The truth is that the guys who need a job and gals who need a job, they're praying a lot more than the guys who already have one. They've probably already invited Christ into that aspect. What I would challenge you is don't kick him out once you get the work. But those of us in work, we have to seek God's direction and seek first his kingdom and his righteousness and all of the other things. And by the way, the context of Matthew 6, all the other things are the things that you get from work. Secondly, sharpen your skills. I love this verse in Ecclesiastes 10:10. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed. But skill will bring success. Do what needs to be done, the hard work and preparation, so that you can be successful in the area you feel called to. 3 weeks ago, I had a conversation on a Saturday night with a gal after a service, and I can't tell you what it was, but it was actually the very first time I'd ever met anybody who wanted to do what she wanted to do. I'd never met anyone who wanted to do that. And it was honest, it was sacred, it was good. I just never had met anybody. And she told me, I can't get work there. And she was saying, what should I do? And then I said, well, what's needed in that vocation? Because I don't really understand what that is. And she said, oh, well, you have to have a graduate degree to get hired in this area. No one gets hired without a graduate degree in this area. I said, okay, do you have that graduate degree? And she said, no. And this is the kind of counseling that you'll get if you were to come to me, because I am the master of the obvious. I said, well, you just told me no one gets hired. That's the job you want, right? Right. And no one gets hired ever unless you have a graduate degree, right? Right. And you don't have a graduate degree, right? Right. Well, you ain't going to get that job. Right? Right. I mean, we act like, well, we're believers. God ought to do something extraordinary. Now, let me say this. I understand that sometimes people get jobs they don't deserve and aren't qualified for. I get that, Grace, personally. But for the most part, if you know nobody gets hired unless you have a graduate degree, then do what it takes to get after the thing you think you're called for. Sharpen, get good at it. What Christ would ask you to do is be great at what you do. To be faithful in the very little things, because if you're faithful in little things, you will be outstanding in whatever area of vocation you have. Whether it's manual labor or tech labor or mental labor, all of those things. Sharpen the skills that it takes to be good at what you do. Or go out there and work your butt off with a dull axe. Because Ecclesiastes 10:10 says it'll take a whole lot more work. You want to swing a dull axe? Go ahead. But if you want to get started at what it looks like to honor Christ, let's start to get better at what we're called to do. Just as an insight for us, the complexity, adding a new children's building is added to the complexity of us as a church. It's a great thing for our kids, and there's all kinds of things, but we have to become experts here at organization. And one of the things I've challenged our staff this past fall was, we got to get better at this. And we're reading intentionally, hanging around people that do this kind of a thing, seeking out staff positions that can kind of help us in this area, because we got to get better at it. We got to sharpen our skills. Number 3, share the prophets. Share the prophets. The scriptures say that you earn what you earn. That all belongs to God too. And share it. And if you're faithful in those things, then there will be great blessings in your life. Proverbs 3, honor the Lord with your wealth and from the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing. Your vats will brim over with new wine. Now, here's a great lie here. And the lie is that I'll become generous when? Oh, Steve, I'm going to be, I had some folks that I talked with, and they said, as soon as we get this credit card debt paid off, we're going to start giving to the church. I said, if that's how you feel like God is leading you, you go ahead. And then I saw him a year later, and I said, how's that whole removal of debt thing going on? And he said, great. I said, okay, well, what'd you do? He said, we bought a car. You see, if you're not generous now, making minimum wage, you're not going to be generous if you win the lotto. You're just not. It's a lie. It's that whole I'll be when. Like I've talked to guys, I'll pay attention to my faith when I get married. I've got time. No, you won't. I'll be generous when I make more money. No, probably not. Start these kind of habits now. And by the way, if you think this is some kind of ploy to get in your pocket for this church, then don't give here. If there's even an inkling of that kind of a thought, don't give here. And I can tell you great places to give. But don't give here if you think that that's what we're trying to do. And then finally, stay with it. Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in slave labor. There's a couple of things that are really hard to overcome in the workforce. And one of them is laziness. Be diligent. Now do it with boundaries, but be diligent. An oak tree, a giant oak tree, is just a little nut that hung around. And the room's full of little nuts. So let's just hang around. Let's just outlast them. Let's just be diligent at what we do. Striving to be the very best because we work for Christ. We don't take Christ to the workplace. I don't like that vernacular. I don't like that grouping of words. Christ is already at your workplace. We just start acknowledging that and cooperating with what he's doing. We recognize we work for him, that our attitude is a reflection of him. It bugs the heck out of me that people are wary if you hand a business card with a fish on it. People become wary of that because Christians have a bad reputation in the workplace. Let's erase that. Let's do our part to erase that. Sharing, sharpening, being diligent, staying with it. All right, let me pray for you. Thank you, Father, that you are intimately involved in what we do Monday through Saturday, as well as what happens on Sunday. Forgive us, God, for separating our lives in a way where you were a different part of our life. Forgive us for that. Give us the courage to invite you into the workplace. Give us the courage to live and work in such a way that we have integrity, that we're faithful in the small things, that we stay with it and that we're diligent, that we acknowledge you as our boss. Oh God, we talk a lot about the things we want to see happen in our valley, but unless we live with integrity in the workplace, you will always be hampered in terms of what you want to do here. We will always stain your reputation. May you have your way there. We invite you, as the song we're about to sing, may it be a prayer of honest, heartfelt desire that we invite you into everything we do. In our waking, in our sleeping, in our working, in our resting, in our playing, everything we do, God. And may that bring you pleasure, and may it glorify Christ. We ask it in his name. Amen.